Thank you for joining us, Arjel. So just as a quick introduction, we are joined today by Dr. Arjel Bautista. He is a Senior Director of ESG Performance and Reporting at Bristol Myers Squibb. He received his PhD in chemistry from Yale in 2010. I'll let him go into more depth on his background and all that, but I just wanted to give everyone a brief overview of who is giving the keynote tonight. And also, Oluwatobi and I are fellows at the Office of Career Strategy. We host several events throughout the year similar to this. They're designed to give people a broad overview of career paths available to them after completing their PhD. And we actually have an event coming up.
Yeah, so we have another event coming up, something like this. It's a keynote session. It's going to be by Dr. Sandy Kuzmich. She's an attorney, a patent law attorney, I think, and she's going to be giving a keynote on patent law, and yeah, it's going to be on the 16th. It's going to be at somewhere around behind. We're going to send the address to everyone, the venue, and it's going to be at 4 p.m. at 2:30 p.m. to 4 p.m. And there's also going to be a hands-on session on talking about patent law and intellectual property law and all of that. So I hope everyone is going to be available. Please attend the event in 2 weeks' time, and I'm sure it promises to be like really good. Right? We're excited to have her, but then we're also excited to have Arjel today. So yeah.
So yeah, I don't want to take up any more of your time from the presentation you prepared, Arjel. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you very much, AJ and Oluwatobi. Just wanted to wish everyone a good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you happen to be joining us from. And if you're in the room, I hear there's pizza in the back, so I hope you're taking advantage, because I definitely would be if I were there. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I regret that I couldn't be there in person, but through the magic of Zoom, I'm glad we get to be together today, regardless. Before I begin, just wanted to thank a couple folks for the invitation to speak today. To AJ and Oluwatobi. I do have to admit, when I received your email in my work inbox, I was in the middle of an email purge and almost deleted it, but I stopped because it was a very enticing proposition. So to the Yale Office of Career Strategy, thank you very much for this forum. And of course, to all of you joining us in the room and on Zoom, thank you for your interest. I hope you can get something out of this today. To introduce myself, my name is Arjel Bautista. Not too long ago, I was in the same exact spot you all were in as a STEM grad student at Yale. So now, whether you're set on exactly what you're going to do next, or weighing a couple options here and there, or just really exploring what's out there, like I said, I sincerely hope you can take something away from our time together today. For starters, on this slide, I want to lay out a picture of what pharma is all about, right? And what a pharma company even does. And I'm going to simplify it on purpose because when I was a grad student, I had no idea, what pharma was about. I actually just had a very narrow view of what these companies did. And it was really restricted to the R&D side of things, right? So discovery of new targets, validation of the targets through in vitro cellular testing, maybe animal models if you're going that far. Some people might be working with strategies on libraries, expressing proteins, biologics, things like this. Others might be doing things like total syntheses of small molecules, not unlike what some of you might be doing in the lab today. And so for a large pharma company, places like Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Bristol Myers Squibb, R&D is actually just a very small part of of things, and this is where it gets exciting for me, the other parts. So there's clinical. These are the folks who run trials in human subjects. These are the ones who collect data toward progressing through the 3 phases, and eventually to FDA, EMA approval. There's medical. These are the folks who work towards sharing the latest knowledge in the science, of the disease states that the companies are studying, best practices for how doctors might use the company's medicines. There's commercial, of course. These are the folks who run the sales pitches to the reps or to the doctors, healthcare providers, the HCPs. The aim here is to generate prescriptions and dollars for the company. There's supply chain. This includes manufacturing and delivering the products to the patients who really need them. And then finally, there's the catch-all category of support, and this includes all the enabling functions. So there's a legal function, there's HR, IT, finance, analytics, you name it. These are the pieces that really help the company run as they should. So for all of you today, I have good news. I want to let you all know that as a Yale PhD, you can play anywhere on this map, from R&D to support, everywhere in between. Your scientific knowledge is not only needed, but valued as well. And it's not just the knowledge, but also just your scientific way of thinking, right? Currently, I'm a senior director in ESG at BMS. We'll get into that shortly. The team that I'm on is officially a part of corporate affairs. And this function is firmly entrenched in the support part of the business. And, along with the rest that are shown here. And so over the rest of the presentation, I'd really like to tell you the story of how I got to where I am today, some of the lessons that I learned along the way, coming from Yale as a PhD student and making that journey. And so at the heart of every journey is an origin story. And here's where my own story begins. So my parents actually grew up as part of the working class in the Philippines. In the province of Bataan. It's about a 3-hour drive from the capital city of Manila. My grandparents survived the Japanese occupation of the country in World War II. And my parents, who were both born in the 50s, grew up poor in the rural countryside. So in 1974, my dad joined the United States Navy, got his chance to come to America. And at the time, he and many of his friends considered America to be the promised land, right? So he and my mom were married in 1980. So that's me. I'm the baby. And they followed the Navy first to Hawaii, where I was born in 1982, and then to San Diego, where I spent my entire childhood. So that's a picture of me performing a medical exam on my stuffed bunny. So as I was telling AJ before everyone joined, I'm the oldest of 3 boys. And when we were all growing up, my parents constantly instilled in us 3 very important lessons. So first is be good to those around you, right? And second, have confidence, but stay humble. We heard this all the time. Like every time we would go to school, present at something, have confidence, but be humble to those around you. And third, your education is the key to the future. My parents knew this themselves from their own upbringing, and they wanted us to know it too. They wanted us to value education as much as they did. So I ended up going to my dream school for college, UC San Diego, partly because it was a decent school, mostly because I wanted to stay close to home. So I stayed in the dorms during the week, went home every single weekend. 2004, I graduated from UCSD and then became the first of my extended family to graduate from college in the United States. And when it came time to decide what to do next, again, a story I was just telling AJ, I had the choice between the comfort, familiarity of going to UCLA, staying in California, or stepping into the adventure of a lifetime and going to Yale. Because I'm here on the screen talking to you today, I think you all know which one I ended up choosing. So I did go to Yale. This is the first picture my dad took of me in the halls of the Humanities Quadrangle on 320 York Street, across the street from the Purview Center. This was once the graduate dorms. So I actually lived on 320 York Street. So if you recall, I chose UCSD for undergrad because it was close to home. For me, Yale was the exact opposite. 3,000 miles away, 5-hour flight each way. I'm sure, some folks who are international feel the same way about coming to Yale. For me, it was the people, the geography, the weather, everything was new to me, right? So, when I was growing up, I never saw snow fall from the sky. Seriously, the first time it snowed, I ran outside of lab with my camera and people thought I was crazy. So, after that first week, I was at Yale, the initial novelty wore off. After the welcome week, I don't know, does the tent party still happen like at HDS over there? After that tent party, once the classes really started, I started getting really homesick. No more going home every weekend. There's no more like familiarity around me. I had to make something new of it. But at the same time, it was a new and a huge adventure, right? So I joined the Shephard's Lab of Chemical Biology in the Department of Chemistry, made a brand new group of friends and colleagues. So top right, that's a picture of us at one of our department Halloween parties. And then this is a picture of me and my office mate. I have to tell you, some of the best friends that you'll make in grad school will come from two places. So your class cohort is one, and your lab group's another. Because I still talk to some of these guys today, 14 years later. We're still pretty close because of what you go through in lab. So in lab, I studied the inhibition of protein-protein interactions with peptidomimetics, specifically fusion inhibitors against HIV. There were a lot of late nights at the HPLC, ton of failed experiments. I often tell undergrads who are interested in PhD programs, if you're planning to go to grad school to get your PhD, it's not just something you do because it's a natural extension of school, the next thing you do after college, but you have to really be interested and invested in it. Because otherwise you're in lab working 60 hours a week, and then you're going to get pretty depressed when your experiment doesn't work for the 10th time. And then you're wondering what to do next, where it all went wrong. So along the way, I learned how to cope, find the silver linings, make the best of my time at Yale. And if you're lucky, and all of the folks who are joining us today, if you have time, I encourage all of you watching to find something outside of work to do too. I was pretty involved with St. Thomas More, which is the Catholic chapel down there, and I took up photography for myself pretty early on. So my advice is whether you like books or movies or the gym, or just getting out to East Rock, going for a hike, taking the train down to New York City, whatever it is, make that time for yourself. Because New Haven can be a pretty interesting place. Depends on what you make of it. So after 5 years, I defended my thesis on a cold day in December 2009. Then I walked in graduation a year later in 2010, in May of that year. So for my next step, I didn't go too far. I ended up at NYU in the heart of New York City. I became a postdoc in the lab of Kent Kirschenbaum. It's nice to be in the city. There's lots of things to photograph, lots of things to do. Brand new group of people to do some amazing science with. For my postdoc, I did sort of the same thing as I did in grad school, different class of peptidomimetics as a strategy for Alzheimer's. And another cool thing is that our lab moved to a new building my first year. So there we are in the new lab. Notice the benchtops are spotless. No one's wearing any PPE. There I am on the top right, leaning against the hood. No lab coat, no safety glasses. So totally a PR picture. I hope there's no statute of limitations against EHS violations, because that's, I hope that's long expired by now. So, so around the time, started to face a decision point as to what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, and all of you will face this decision too. For me, unlike grad school, which lasts a little while, that's more like a marathon than a sprint. A postdoc by design has a beginning and an end. And so when you're a scientist faced with your first job, you typically have two choices, right? So typically you can go into academia, you can become a professor, or you can go into industry. So that's the two typical choices you have. You can go into that R&D pillar that I mentioned in that simplified view of pharma if you go to industry. For me, I realized that both of these choices were equally unappealing. And I had to sit and come to terms with what I actually liked about being a scientist. For me, I couldn't stand setting up experiments anymore, and the thought of going to the mass spec or the plate reader, seeing my product wasn't binding to its target for the 1000th time was getting pretty brutal. But for me, I realized after all this that my favorite part was, of science was crunching data, presenting it on slides. At the same time, I was hearing about my grad school colleagues who had also graduated, gone on to do management consulting. So I figured, hey, let's give this a look. So to help me prepare, I bought a copy of the Would-Be Consultant's Preparation Bible. It's a book called Case in Point by Mark Cosentino. Highly recommended if you're going to go down the consulting route. It's filled with great cases for your interviews. And the thing about consulting interviews is that you need to find a partner to practice these cases with. And that's the key. And so for cases, it's things like these questions, right? It's like, what's the size of the US market for helium balloons? How many golf balls can fit into an Airbus A320? And the classic, one of your friends from college is going to open a coffee shop in Boston. Do you think this is a good idea? Right? Actual cases, I've been asked some variation of these, like in my interviews. Normally schools, or like companies don't necessarily need to know the right answer. You can arrive at the right answer, but they want to know how you're thinking, right? How you arrived at the answer. It's your thinking process that's important to them. And so normally schools will have consulting clubs where they'll actually pair you up with people to practice cases like this. But NYU at the time didn't have anything. I tried to go to the management school. They said, no, you're not a business school student, so you can't join. So for me to build my skill set in this space, I sought out consulting clubs at other schools. Columbia was up the road on the along the subway, and they were cool with me showing up at their meetings and their practice sessions as long as I brought the $10 to join. So they let me right in. So we practiced a ton of cases, and it was a good prep session. But preparation is one part, but applying is another. I must have applied to 40, 50 consulting firms before I actually got anywhere. And it was rejected by, all kinds of places. Oliver Wyman, McKinsey, BCG, Capgemini, they all rejected me after I got pretty deep into the process. And so around this time, the former president of that Columbia Consulting Club got a job at a small boutique consulting firm called OC&C, and I was more than happy to put my resume on the partners' desks. And I got an on-site interview as a result. And because I knew that guy, I only needed to go through a couple of rounds, and then I was presented with an offer that was long seeking then. So during the time I was preparing for these interviews, I moved to central New Jersey, where I live now. So I have the benefit, but also the challenge of taking a 90-minute train ride in and out of work every day. Think of taking the Metro North like every single day to work, back and forth. For me, it was a benefit because I had extra time to study business, to study, cases, things like this. But it was a disadvantage because it was New Jersey Transit, and it doesn't always work when you need to. So this was my first real job outside the lab, fast-paced from day one. I was a science PhD, but they actually assigned me to a consumer goods project at first. Literally, it was, how does bread get from the factory to the store shelves at Costco? I was doubting myself immediately. But then after a while, I realized that these guys hired me not because I knew how to set up experiments in the hood or because I knew how to do combinatorial chemistry, but because I knew how to think like a scientist. So this is one of my process flows from an early project. So if you look closely, it almost looks like a chemical reaction or a biological pathway, right? With all the arrows going from piece to piece. And so thinking like a scientist is something that everybody who's on this call does every single day. You ask questions, you make conjectures, design experiments, you test out your theories. Consulting, business, pharma is all about that. So in all business, you have to be ready for the unexpected. In 2012, the partners, the owners of the business, called an all-hands meeting, and they informed us that, hey, we're not going to be part of OC&C anymore. We're going to spin off. We're going to be a brand new startup called CKM Advisors. And we're going to go away from the generalist consulting, the store shelves, bread project, things like that. Instead, we're going to focus on big data and this thing called digital analytics, which is like something new at the time. So luckily for me, one of the partners at the time was a pioneer in big data, taught me everything he knew, at the time. And that year, we were fortunate enough to have our work published as part of a process mining contest we entered. We actually ended up winning, mostly because of Lalit Wangekar, who was the guru who taught us everything. But it was an honor being part of that team. So now, when I became a consultant, part of the appeal there was the possibility of traveling to different parts of the world. In November of 2012, a couple of years ago now, I was assigned to a project for a large bank in Zurich, Switzerland. I was there for a couple of weeks. And this is a picture of me working late into the night. And this was the night before Thanksgiving. So during that trip, working hard late into the night, traveling, not being close to home, that's when I realized, okay, I don't really like traveling for work on extended projects. Probably would make much more sense for me in my lifestyle to work in a single office closer to home instead of just running around all the time. And then a couple of months later, one of our clients, JP Morgan, approached me with an invitation to interview. Turns out one of the partners, excuse me, at CKM just left the firm and was looking to build his team at JP Morgan. And he knocked on my door then. So, answer the call, made it through that interview process, and, did some really interesting work there. We were starting to look at the client services as part of, the private banks, so our richest clients, like $5 million in net worth and above. And at this point, I was still thinking like a scientist, except now I was armed with even more tools. I had the thinking like a scientist piece, but now I had an understanding of big data, digital analytics from my days at the startup. And so I'll skip over a couple of these pieces, but there was a project that we did where we said, hey, the private bank should be a little bit more selective and make their minimums $10 million. A couple months later, that story ended up in the Wall Street Journal, which was really cool, from my team's standpoint. So I was still doing this 90-minute commute every day because I was still living in central New Jersey, still taking that train every single day. For some reason in 2015, the trains decided they weren't going to work every single day. More often than not, I'd go to Penn Station on the way home and see this. So this is just a crowd of people at New York Penn Station. Trains would be delayed anywhere between 30 minutes and 4 hours. And sometimes literally I'd be home so late that I'd only have time to jump in the shower, sleep a couple hours, wake up, do it all over again. I was, hoping for Saturdays, much more than I ever had, in that job. So now comes the pharma bench, right? In 2016, I was trolling through the job listings and found out that the new CEO of BMS, at the time, Giovanni Caforio, he was starting up a brand new team called R&D Business Insights and Analytics. And he was looking for qualified candidates to fill roles. So for me, this was a great call because BMS was just 20 minutes from home. I'd be able to leverage my skill set in an area that was closer to my educational background in science. So my first job at BMS was manager of R&D performance benchmarking and reporting. And essentially what we were looking at is our performance against the rest of the industry in clinical trials. So if you envision this diagram to represent the entire clinical trials process from discovery on the left to approval on the far right, it was my job to figure out and to evaluate the length of time it was taking from the beginning of the process to the end. This is the cycle time, they call it. And we needed to see how we were performing against the rest of the industry. I was also responsible for success rates, looking at success rates, the likelihood of us going from one phase to another. And of course, the cost, right? How much is this going to cost us in terms of people, in terms of dollars that we're investing? For that job, I was actually fortunate to represent BMS at the Pharmaceutical Benchmarking Forum. We were sent to Wiesbaden, Germany in 2016, but just for 2 days this time, with reps from all the other pharma companies. So, Merck, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Roche, all the heavy hitters were there. I was actually surprised at how collegial everyone was there, how willing everybody was to share their strategies, their predictive techniques. And I think it's because we were all kind of portfolio and analytics nerds and the support function, far away from commercial. So we weren't like competing with each other in terms of generating prescriptions and sales. So now, every time BMS would, do something like approve or acquire a compound, license things, terminate a project, it was my job to recalculate these numbers, figure out how we were measuring up. Our numbers actually ended up in the financial reports that BMS was releasing every quarter, every year. And so here's an example of a cycle time that ended up in our 10K success rate. So this is, at this time, I'm not doing any lab work anymore. This is all purely just like analytics pieces in support of the folks who are actually doing the R&D. So my next job at BMS, after 3 years of working in R&D, I was approached by a new director who was hired at the time. She was telling me, hey, like I'm going to start a team to do medical analytics. And so medical, as a reminder, is that interesting bridge in the pharma diagram that's between clinical, so the piece that I was measuring prior, people who are running the trials, and commercial, who are the folks who are making sales pitches to doctors. So accepting a job here would challenge me to go even further into my roots as a scientist and still leveraging that toolbox as an analytics specialist. And so my job here was to perform text analytics. So the early parts of machine learning. On the hundreds of field reports, our MSLs, or medical science liaisons, were gathering from doctors every week. And to figure out, what are the trends that we're seeing? What do we do with this? For example, these doctors are talking about a hypothetical drug called Trabulex. One of them is saying, hey, this is going to be practice changing. This will change my patients' lives. Two others are skeptical. They're saying, hey, there's side effects that worry me. This doctor is saying, like, I've been using your competitor for a long time. I don't think I'm going to be using this. Another has a more hypothetical question. If my patients are on protein supplements, can they take Tribulex? That kind of thing. So we'd have to synthesize these, figure out what we do next, give the strategies to medical who would actually execute on these on their next visit to these doctors. Things like this. So it's just getting used to that job. And around March 2020, everyone's life changed because that's when COVID hit. And suddenly the hundreds of field reports that we were getting every day turned into thousands of field reports we were getting per day. And now our team was really thrust into the spotlight as a key source of information to guide the company's medical response to the patients during the pandemic. We were able to understand how doctors were dealing with Opdivo patients who needed to go into the clinics to receive infusions. How are they going to space them out? Eliquis patients who couldn't go to the pharmacy, like they needed restocks of their medication. So we fed this information to our clinical division, our medical division. We helped the company understand exactly how doctors were responding, and other things too, how doctors were responding to telemedicine, things like this. Eventually, the pandemic died down. We went back to our regularly scheduled program, guiding launches, industry congresses. 2021, I was promoted to become the medical analytics lead for cardiovascular and immunology. And we supported the launches of 3 drugs you may have heard of, so Zeposia, Camzyos, and Sotyktu. And we also got creative. We innovated a methodology for doing text analytics on social media posts, so understanding how doctors react when BMS is not in the room on Twitter. Who are the influencers, things like this. So medical was a great place to be. It's where I got my first taste of being a manager of people after years of just being an individual contributor. And in management, still learning something new every day. Grateful for the experience. Just a couple more pictures here. This is me at a recent medical leadership meeting back in May. This is a picture of me on the top right. My last day on the job before I moved to ESG, which I'll touch on briefly. So in June of this year, I was promoted to senior director and took up an opportunity in ESG where they needed someone to build out and run their performance reporting function. And so briefly, I won't touch on this too long as I'd really like to take your questions as well. But ESG stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance Sustainability, and is roughly a measure of companies' ability to manage their non-financial risks toward long-term survivability and sustainability. So we're thinking about, companies surviving 25, 50 years from now. Like, can BMS still survive, based on, us managing these risks? So for ESG, this includes your environmental stewardship, of course, like, making sure that we manage our greenhouse gas emissions properly, things like this. It also includes societal topics, like our obligation to take care of our patients, our employees. It also includes a strong system of governance, sort of ensuring that we conduct business ethically and in fair manner. So, things like fraud, conflicts of interest, making sure that those don't pose a reputational risk for BMS. So I've been in this role for a little over 2 months, but my team has already begun producing some exciting deliverables that are publicly available, communicate our position to the public and our stakeholders, starting with our ESG report, so released in August of this year. Every company actually has one of these. So if you have if you take the Fortune 500 companies, 494 companies state their ESG position toward their sustainability and talk about how they manage these as well. So I'll skip a couple slides ahead. And my favorite part actually of my new role, it's different from the one in medical, the one in R&D, is that it allows my team visibility into what's happening across the business, all 6 boxes of the pharma diagram. So for me, because our efforts directly affect our patients and their loved ones that surround them, I find this to be a particularly noble, worthwhile effort. And so, I've gone over the jobs I've had in and out of pharma, and one thing is constantly true, that the PhD that I got from Yale opened doors for me that I wouldn't have had otherwise. There are a ton of jobs that you can do in pharma with yours. This is just a sampling of careers that I found when I looked at Indeed the other night. So places like site selection, you can have a hand in where clinical trials are held. You could be the one who's collecting those insights, like the fake ones from Trabulex that I brought up. You could be in product quality in the manufacturing and supply chain space, or you can go into IT. Digital health, generative AI are going to be playing increasing roles in pharma in the future. So that's a big part that you can play in as well. So I just wanted to take 2 minutes to give you all some advice. You've heard me describe my own career story. Just wanted to give you all some advice for helping you write yours. So I've always heard the adage that it's very important to figure out what you like and what you want to do with your career. For me, like I've always found it equally as important to figure out what you don't want to do. And it's perfectly okay to be uncomfortable, with what you discover. I discovered during my postdoc I didn't want to be in the lab anymore. I discovered during my work trip to Zurich that I didn't want to travel for long distances or, long amounts of time. I just want to stick around close to home. I had to be okay with that. And it's okay for you too. It's okay to change your career path along the way, to make modifications, change things up as things go along. Which leads me to my next point, because the jobs that you end up with 5 or 10 years after you get out of your PhD program, your postdoc, it might not even exist yet today. For me, my job in medical didn't exist when I was hired into BMS, and my job that I have now in ESG didn't exist when I moved into medical. And when I joined medical, it was my job to kind of shape what that role would look like. And so my advice for you is that if you end up bringing skills that would be useful for a role or shaping a role, let it be known and definitely use it, because you might be the only person in the company who has that particular skill. Thinking like a scientist is huge and important here. So third, your network, your connections are going to be a key part of your career toolbox. So get on LinkedIn, use it well. I'm not saying you have to make posts there like TikTok or Instagram or anything, but definitely build that network. See who you already know. Don't be afraid to reach out to me. So I'm happy to help my fellow Yale folks, make connections where it's possible. See who you already know. I became a consultant because of Paul, the Columbia Graduate Consulting Club. I got into JP Morgan because of a former, advisor at CKM. For you, your Yale PhD will show people that you're smart. It'll get you in the door. The network will help open the doors and get you in. Just a couple more. Just maintain a brag book. Be open to unexpected possibilities. So keep a personal copy of those projects that you worked on, a diary of emails from managers that praise you, stakeholders that comment on the difference between, that you've made in their orgs. Don't let a job description hold you back from your next step. Because I became a consultant. I didn't know Excel at the time. Consultants are all about Excel. I had to learn that on the job. I joined JP Morgan without an MBA, became a medical analytics lead without an MD or PharmD. You can do it too, and the brag book will help you figure out where you've done things in that job description. And the last piece is don't be afraid to take risks, but be calculated in doing so. Consider the possibilities, and you never know how much your next jump may change your life. On a personal note, you remember this picture from my days at Yale. This was Danielle, who was my lab mate at the time of the Shepards lab. We spent every day together. So remember I said some of your best friends you'll make in grad school will come from your lab. And for me, this is so much more because Danielle and I got married many years later in 2012. Now we actually live with our daughter, Julia, and our beagle, Toby. So finally, through all the work, all the career moves that you'll make in your life as part of your story, in the words of my mom, be good to those around you and have confidence, but stay humble. And above all, never lose sight of the most important things in life, because you go through your career, you go through your studies, take a look around you and don't miss what's going on around you as well. So and that's it. Just wanted to thank AJ Oluwatobi again for the invitation, and happy to take any questions that you all might have.
Yeah, so if anyone in the room has any questions, feel free to just raise your hand or speak up. If anyone on Zoom wants to raise your hand, Oluwatobi and I will comb through the participant list and see if any hands are raised, or if you just want to drop it in the chat, you could do that too.
questions? We also have some questions there.
Yeah, I've got
Okay,
it.
someone has their hand raised.
Yep.
Matthew, yeah.
Matthew, yeah.
Hi, that was a really great talk. I'm happy to hear about alternative paths besides R&D. I was wondering about where you developed your skills and how you developed your skills in business and analytics and consulting. Was that on the job, through the job, or how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, no, I was fortunate to have great mentors throughout my career. So when we went from just being that consulting company to startup, like I mentioned, Lalit Wangekar took me under his wing, taught me the analytics piece, and just got me trained on the job there as well. That train ride helped a lot too, because in my spare time I was reading books like the 10-day MBA, just reading business left and right, keeping my eye on the Wall Street Journal, things like that. It's when I was at JP Morgan, I had studied for the CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst level 1. Taught me a lot there as well. A lot of it is self-study, but like I said, I've had a ton of great mentors and owe a ton to them for what I know today.
Laura has a question in the chat box. She says, thank you, Arjel. Great talk. Do you have any advice on how to build a network?
Yeah. That's a good question. It took me some getting used to also. LinkedIn has been a huge piece, but just being at events like this is huge. The Office of Career Strategy is going to be a huge network. AJ did not pay me to say that, but it's going to be a huge tool for you because just meeting people who have similar interests as you is going to be key. People you work with, people you're in lab with now. Because you never know where people will end up in the future, and you never know who's looking out for you. I mentioned some folks in my closing about people who had kind of aided me in getting the jobs that I've had. Every single job I've had since my postdoc was because I knew somebody. They were willing enough to put my resume on the boss's desk and help me out with getting interviews. And it's not people I necessarily talk to every day. The most interesting piece was when I actually came to BMS, the person who put my resume on the desk was someone who had done their postdoc in the lab that I did my PhD in, and we never overlapped. I just found them on LinkedIn and said, hey, Scott, you don't know me, but we both did work in the Shephard's lab. Can we have a phone call like for 15 minutes, like if you're free at all? We got to know each other, and then he was more than willing to put that on the desk. It's so definitely leverage the connections you have now. Ask for introductions to the people that they know. The second degree connections can be really huge.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So as you were going about, it seemed like there was a period of time where you had a new job every 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, you're piecing a narrative together, and it seems like there's a logical flow from each job to the next.
Yeah.
But when you were in each position and you were like looking ahead for what's next, what were some of the things that were on your radar aside from just realizing what you like and what you don't like? Was there like a more like longer term path where you kind of like a direction you wanted to head in?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And it's about being open to those possibilities, and there's a third component too, right? There's what you like, what you don't like, and what's available out there. Because it's the job market will play a huge role. When I was getting out of my postdoc, it was a terrible job market back then, 2010 and 11. What I didn't write in the story was, I had an opportunity to go into editing at Wiley for scientific writings. I thought long and hard about that one. I didn't want to do it, so it's it wasn't part of the kind of the narrative that I wanted to do. The greatest thing in the greatest goal that you can have in your career is that do something you love and get paid for it too. So for me, it's I always love the numbers part of it. I always love presenting. So now it's like I come to work every day. I get to do both, and they pay me for it too. So it's if you can find that sweet spot, it's great. And again, it's like it's being open to what's out there and the possibilities as well, and learning how to say no when it's when it's not the right thing.
So I also have another question. How can one, you know, how can one prepare for the job markets such that you're competitive enough to, because there are people from like very specific fields,
Yeah.
just to stay competitive with those kind of people. How do
Yeah.
you prepare from like, from your PhD to that?
That's a great question. I would say and it's easy to say, it's tough to do, right? But it's as you're studying for your PhD, if there are skills that you're interested in developing, take that up as like a side project as well. Like go on LinkedIn Learning. I think as Yale students, you might have it for free or reduced, right? So go on there. There are a ton of courses on there, Coursera, places like that as well. Just pick up skills that might be useful in a career that you're interested in. There's a ton of if you're interested in like generative AI, for example, or the chat GPT space, that's going to be incredibly competitive in the coming years. And having a PhD from Yale while also learning stuff in your spare time will make you extremely competitive going forward. And pair that up with a network who can get you in the right places, and you'll be unstoppable. So I like my only regret from grad school is that either there was no office of career strategy or I was not aware of it, because this was a huge thing that I totally would have taken advantage of. AJ did not pay me to say that either. So I'll come over there and take the pizza that you guys have in the back of the rooms.
Does anyone have any questions? We have the next 9 minutes or something. And if you're on Zoom, please drop your question in the chat box.
Yeah. So I'll address a question that was submitted prior from international students who had questions about visa sponsorship and looking for jobs that might sponsor them. So I have friends and teammates who were also sponsored, right? They had mentioned that they made great use of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service website. So there's H-1B employer data hub there. Keep your eye on that piece. See what might interest you, because that's a great resource for finding jobs that might sponsor. And if it's if you're open to the possibility of if it's necessary, going into an international company in your home country and then getting transferred back to the U.S. is an avenue that I've seen as well. I have several teammates who are from India, and they were hired by BMS to work in our India office, and then after a couple of years, they were able to secure their H-1Bs to come back to the U.S. So more than a couple success stories in that front.
Yeah, that reminds us that there were questions submitted online before. So if no one has any others, let's just go down that list, I guess. So go for it.
Oh, okay. So I'm looking at this question. It says that what are some common pitfalls to be aware of when pursuing a career in your field?
Yeah.
Career path in your field, and how can we learn from some of you or your colleagues' mistakes?
Yeah, no, that's a good one too. And yeah, so the big pitfall is just jumping at the first opportunity and not giving yourself, options, right? Not weighing out. My fifth point was to take calculated risks, but think about it before you jump. I had to do that several times in my life when I had the option of doing one thing versus the other. Make sure that you weigh out your options. Literally, like, sit there and make a pro con list, like with a piece of paper, and say, hey, which one on these dimensions, which of these two choices make more sense to me. I did that for academia versus industry, and then there was no winner. So that's why I chose the third option. I've had to do that for other options in my life. I've oftentimes, a couple times in my life, I had two options as to which positions I wanted to even apply to. And for me, I said, hey, let's make that pro con list, because I don't want to go in uninformed. That's the worst thing you can do, is go in uninformed, because the worst thing that can happen is you end up with a job that you absolutely hate. So it's not worth it if you can get ahead of the situation.
And Lindsay has a question on Zoom as well. It says, were there certain skills you wish you built during postdoc or grad school to increase your chances of getting an industry position? And how crucial is it to get an internship in industry before you apply for the full-time job?
That's a great question, Lindsay, and no, thanks for asking that. I wish I had made more of an effort to network, right, and to meet people from outside my lab. I was pretty antisocial, so like there were parties at Gypsy that happened all the time. Is Gypsy still a thing? So
Griffins.
No, it's
Griffins.
Yeah.
See how things change. Like you leave for a couple of years, like, but yeah. So Griffins, like, they'd have parties there all the time. I don't drink, so like, I was like, oh, not worth me showing up. I wish I had gone to those just to meet more people and to build out that network. That would have helped me get a head start on things. The fact that you folks are in the room now and attending this talk is going to be a huge jump, going forward. As far as getting an internship in industry, I'm not sure how it is on the R&D side. I think that might be more necessary than the business side. But on the business side, they'll hire postdocs, they'll hire PhDs out of it. Like I've heard of like medical science liaisons, so the folks who meet with doctors to ask them about their insights. They'll hire them straight out of grad school if they're if they have the right skill set. So more often than not, it'll be smaller companies or biotechs, but it's not unheard of at BMS as well for someone to be hired out, with little experience, just with a PhD.
Like 4 minutes left.
Yeah, we've got a few minutes left. I think there was another question that was submitted online that I think kind of ties in nicely with the question you addressed earlier about working on a visa, navigating the job market.
Yeah.
So this question is, given the current economic environment, as a foreign graduate student studying neuroscience who doesn't want to stay in academia, it's very hard to be optimistic about the job market. What's your suggestion to this mentality, and what would you recommend us to do while still at school to become more competitive when we go on the market?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It always comes back down to that network. Like, talk with doctors who might be doing things that are interesting in the neuroscience space. BMS just is building out its own neuroscience piece because Alzheimer's is still the kind of the holy grail out there. There's a lot of companies out there. We just Zeposia is our multiple sclerosis drug. I know tons of like MSLs, again the medical science folks who are in the neuroscience department. So if you're in the neuroscience space, definitely get to know people out there. Just so like I said, the jobs out there might not materialize now, but when they come out in the future, and you're looking, you want to be the person who's on their mind to reach out to, because essentially as you progress through your career, you're not going to be going on bms.com or like on these Taleo websites to apply anymore. Like that doesn't happen later in the career. The network will pull you in and say, hey, Oluwatobi, it would be a great candidate for this. Let's just pull him. Let's ask him. And so you want to be on the short list of people's minds. So getting to know people is going to be a huge thing. Go to congresses for if you have a chance to go to congresses for neuroscience. Industry congresses, like definitely, ECTRIMS is a good one. ACTRIMS is another for MS. Go there as well because there's gonna be a ton of industry folks who can guide your path. And don't be afraid to introduce yourself. Don't be afraid to go to the happy hours at those congresses and just introduce yourself, because as a Yale grad student, it's going to be they'll be interested to talk to you. And yeah, so I always bring up LinkedIn because it's interesting too, because what you could do is sometimes you go to these congresses and they'll release the participant list, and it's a sort of semi-stalking, but you can go on that list and see who went to Yale and who has a common thread to you. And honestly, like AJ and I just had a conversation before this, and we were talking about pizza and like how I used to live near the Payne Whitney gym, and how it's like it's not so bad anymore. Just the fact, like AJ and I didn't know each other before this, but the fact that he's going to Yale now and I'd gone before is a common thread that we were able to connect on. So you can do that too, if you're out and about and going to congresses.
I think we can. It's a good place to.
Yeah, on that note, I think we'll wrap up because we have to be out of this room in a few minutes. But thank you so much for joining us, Arjel. That was an awesome keynote.
Thanks for the invite. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
of course, our pleasure.
It was
Awesome.
really good. Yeah. Thank you
And
so much.
yeah, no, I'm absolutely serious. If you reach out to me on LinkedIn, let me know that you're at the talk. We can chat.
All right.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Okay.
Take care, all.
See you when we
Take
see
care.
you.